about all this crazy stuff you've done in the past. And, it sounds like what you're talking about is like, psychotherapy for PTSD. Can you tell us a little bit about, I think it's important to look at these traumatic moments in your life and come to grips with them and own them, and so that you can move on. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the thing I guess that which I didn't realize at the time kind of interested me in PTSD was my papa, he was a POW in Vietnam. At 18, they lined him all up on their knees and shot him all in the back of the head, and it broke off a piece of his skull. He saved another man, and the guy ended up committing suicide. So he actually just passed away 2 weeks ago, but I mean, he was ready to go. He told me all the time, he said, I keep trying to die and I just won't. And like the guy like came back from the war, got hit with a brick working like over the head, like things like he just wouldn't die. But like, he would always talk to me about what happened in Vietnam. And so like hopefully one day I will get around, I will write down like the stories that he told me. But as a kid, he wasn't talking like that to my cousins. Like he was like telling me like, just little like out the side of the mouth, like, oh, what I saw. And I was like, okay, like whatever. But like he would come talk to my schools, and I always thought it was like gangster as fuck. Like I was like, yeah, that's my papa. And yeah, so I never realized that he had PTSD. And whenever I started the book, I read an article in Vanity Fair. It was probably like it was like 8 years ago, maybe seven. And it was about MDMA therapy for PTSD. So the story that was in there, the woman, she went through not like a war veteran PTSD, which doesn't actually make up the full percent. People always talk about, oh, like war, like whenever I say it's MD or psychedelic therapy for PTSD, they're like, oh, so like a war victim or whatever. And I'm like, so the book itself is not following a war inflicted PTSD. It's following a woman's journey who has a great trauma happen to her, which is where a lot of PTSD lies. So in the article I read, which I kind of based my story around, the woman, she goes to the therapy sessions, which for MDMA therapy for PTSD, it's a really intense, extreme process. It's 3 8-hour sessions with two psychotherapists. So you're going in with two psychotherapists. You're basically spending the rest of the day with them because they want you to kind of sleep there typically. Then you're going to talk about it after you get some rest and reflect. And you take, the medication, you put on sleeping masks. And this is like, lab grade MDMA. So you can imagine, I mean, especially if you've never done drugs, like the woman's story, it sounded like acid to me at the time, and I didn't know all the things I know now, but at the time it was like super ethereal. She blasted off, like she was like seeing this like almost dream world, and it was really beautiful from a different perspective. So she essentially, you walk with MDMA, it releases oxytocin and serotonin, which oxytocin makes you feel really comfortable, like it's like when mother's milk, and then serotonin makes you feel happy. So with PTSD, there's a wall that is created that keeps you from remembering the exact moment that caused your trauma. So anytime you start to remember it, like for example, a war veteran, they hear like a loud crash, and they start having physical responses because their brain and their body is trying to keep from remembering it. So with MDMA, it breaks down those walls and keeps the body from having physical responses to the trauma. So you're able to actually remember it without like physically fight or flight, panicking and running, or, fighting back or something. So, people always like, I have these stickers I give out and it says a novel about psychedelic therapy. And 1 out of 3 people, they say, oh, like ketamine. And I'm like, no, no, like, and I'll get into that, what I think ketamine is as far as that, um, you know, part of the psychedelic therapy, alternative medicine, what they're doing with that. But, and then the other third of people will be like, oh, like mushrooms. And I'm like, no, I wish, like, because I mean, I've done MDMA, but like, I don't do it anymore and it doesn't really affect me. I think mushrooms actually like change my brain chemistry to where MDMA doesn't affect me anymore, like the serotonin rush or something.
So what
But
is MDAA? What is it
M-
exactly?
so MDMA is
MDMA, excuse me.
it's yeah, it's methyl something. It's a long word, but it's basically ecstasy. You know, like the '80s rolling. My mom, she makes me so mad because she'll be like, whenever I tell people MDMA, she's like ecstasy, and I'm like, Mom, he credits it, but I'm like, she grew up in the '80s. You know what I mean? And but with like ecstasy and stuff, or like currently they call it Molly. Or I remember whenever I was in like high school and stuff, it was called rolls or stacks. And they were like, but those are basically like Molly is supposedly a pure form of MDMA, but they're all cut with other things. So like the ecstasy that people are doing on the streets typically is going to be cut or mixed with like meth or some other compound that is like gonna make it not like a pure form of MDMA, the chemical.
And you can't like that's not considered medicine. You can't cure
Like,
depression off of
Are
that,
you
I
asking
obviously.
mean,
for a friend, Xavier? Are you
I'm
asking for
asking
a
for all
friend?
my friends that use it at EDC. Yes, I am asking for them.
oh yeah, right. Like I went to EDC actually in 21. So I saw your pictures there. It was dope. But everybody at EDC, is like on that shit. Like they're the nicest people ever. Like literally one time well, maybe not at EDC, but certain like house festivals. One time I swear my friend left her leather jacket on the ground in the middle of the dance floor. We come back like 8 hours later and people are like dancing around it, like guarding the jacket. Like they're like, we knew you'd be back. And so like it's just like the love drug or whatever. Taking it on your own is not considered therapy. Although some people might like, find therapeutic means to it. And like like it started with being a therapy couples therapy drug in like the 70s or something. So, I've heard about like couples who are older who like experiment with that every like couple months or something like that. I could see that being therapeutic for them, but I don't recommend taking any like street MDMA just because of like fentanyl and all that these days, unless, I mean, you can test it. But I don't think like, and I mean, to a certain extent, like you don't even know what you're getting in a lab too. You have to really trust the doctors, trust the institution and all that.
So what is the process that when you give someone MDMA, how are they dealing? What does it do with the PTSD? How does that, what is the chemical what is happening when they're confronting their issue? What is happening?
So, like we talked about like the chemicals, but say that so with the therapy sessions, there's 3 8-hour sessions. The first session is going to be like, just like sitting down talking about your basic therapy, like what went on last week and blah blah blah. And then the second session is going to be talking about like your childhood or, just like distant memories. And then the third session is going to be getting into the actual like trauma, like the memories and all that arising and surrounding around that the actual event that you're trying to heal. So basically like what I've seen is in people's stories recounting their experience with MDMA therapy for PTSD, it was like um it was like they were walking through the same memory, but like the lost one or the terrible thing that happened, they're like returning to them almost and telling them like I'm here. Like it's almost like a religious thing, like this like these like, and I don't want to say entities, but like whenever you said like I always wished I could shroom with my friend who passed away, I was like in my head gonna be like, well, maybe you kind of can if you're like spiritual like that. But I mean, we don't really know if these memories, whenever they're seeing their lost loved ones coming back and reassuring them that, like that this was meant to happen and that you're meant to be stronger from this and that you can like help people going through similar things and all that. We don't know if it's in their head, if it's a spiritual thing, like they are in another dimension, or they are in heaven, or they're right here, but in another plane that is like, just 45 or 90-degree angle away from us.
So if we go in there, we're having these 3 sessions. Third session, I'm talking about my trauma and what's going on. And have you has anyone explained to you what the process is? Like why is this working? Because we've had guests on talking about how the government is really trying to use psychedelics to deal with a lot of what is going on, when we send our troops into these war zones and they're coming back traumatized, and they're trying to use all these different psychedelics, whether it's MDMA or mushrooms or whatever. Do we have have you done any research into what exactly happens?
So, well, I mean, as far as like, I think mentally, so it's right now, well, the main research they have, it's about like 67% effective for, and then for like ongoing treatment, it gets a little bit higher. So it doesn't work every time. But as far as you were saying, it's funny because, since 2017, the FDA was, whenever I first started my book, it was in stage 1 clinical trials. And then by the time I finished it, it was past stage 4. And they deemed it a breakthrough therapy. But actually, just on June 4th, and I just saw this the other day, there is like a panel trying to come down on it. And they're starting to like question it again. And I think a lot of that has to do with what these war veterans are remembering. Like they and my papa would always say that to me, because I was like gonna go interview him and get the whole story, and he got kind of nervous, and he was like, well, like there are things that we like did wrong over there, and then like there are things that happen after with like the government that he wasn't supposed to remember. I kind of realized that like this part of him was like, don't get her wrapped up in like all these like secrets that could get her killed.